Very often in political philosophy, the historical context in which the question is being asked is more important than the particular answer to the question itself. So you have to acknowledge the context in which a particular writer is justifying a war against Joseph Stalin. You may read some great celebrated chapter out of the history of political philosophy and think, this is really a very shallow and insincere critique of communism. This doesn't really deal with the ideals that communists are so dear to communists' hearts. This is not going to convince someone who's a communist to become an ex-communist or anti-communist. This doesn't address the injustices of capitalism. Okay, but what you have to understand is this book or this essay or this article was written in this context at this time as an attempt to solve this problem. And indeed, I have to admit this myself all the time. There are people who have adopted a political position I agree with in Israel, for example, and I feel they discredit me. They discredit my perspective because the cynical and insincere and even insane arguments they offer, even if it's in support of a political objective I agree with, they're of such poor quality. Okay, but look at the reality. Look at the actual situation these people are living in Israel today. Tragically, these are often people, their own friends and relatives have literally been abducted, have literally been raped, have literally been murdered, or have had terrorists break into their house and hold them at gunpoint, and they survive without those other things happening. Okay, so in this context, perhaps this is a very shallow critique of Hamas. Perhaps this doesn't really deal with the complexities of the history that put Hezbollah in this position and the nature of the land disputes in various territories. Yeah, okay. Sometimes the context, the reasons why the question is being asked, sometimes those are more important than the particular answer. So today I'm dealing with this profound and important question of human rights. And in effect, the question is, why am I an example of a political philosopher and a social media influencer and an actor and a clown and a creative writer and other things, but a political philosopher among the hats I wear? Why am I opposed to human rights? And why am I giving people practical advice to avoid explaining their own political position, justifying their own political position in terms of human rights and animal rights? That's the main use we're talking about. We are not debating whether or not Donald Trump should be brought into court for violating a principle of human rights. There may be a very different context in which we have to talk about human rights a different way. So last things first. So I am going to talk about human rights as such. This video is not just about animal rights. It is not just about the way in which human rights sets up a sort of parallelism whereby vegans organize and define their activism and try to change the world, working in parallel to the precedent set by human rights in our culture. But the question is put to me, okay, so you've made this point in various YouTube videos prior to this one. You've offered this critique of human rights and pointed out what's wrong with it or what's misleading about it, what's counterproductive about engaging with issues. Okay. But then should I, the person writing the question, should she, when she is standing on the sidewalk, actually avoid using the language of animal rights and actually broach these issues and these questions in a different way, right? So in a different way from what? Obviously, we have very clear examples like Gary Francione, someone who was influential in the movement for many years, but I think now his influence at an end. But he was a professor of law and presented this very dry, cerebral, legalistic argument in favor of animal rights. And then we have the whole utilitarian tradition before, during, and after Francione's period of fame. Again, legalistic reasoning having to do with animal rights. I mean, anyway, what could be more absurd, frankly, than the combination of utilitarianism and animal rights? But that is a subject for another video. What hot ice is this? They're really two completely incompatible paradigms. But okay. The pragmatic question of what you should say to a complete stranger on a sidewalk. Are you offering to be this person's friend? Are you actually open to the possibility that they will come back to your house for dinner tonight? And if the answer is no, what the fuck are you doing on the sidewalk? Now, some of you may just have had a sharp intake of breath because some of you have been doing sidewalk activism for years. Oh, you think that's too high a hurdle for you to overcome? That's asking too much of you? Trust me, Mormon missionaries trying to convert someone to their religion, they will go to that person's house for dinner. They will invite that person back to their own house for dinner. There is no question the minimum level of commitment in converting someone else to your religion. Mormonism is an easy example. We could talk about Buddhism. We could talk about all kinds of different, whether it's a new age cult or traditional continuous ancient religions. Oh, please, homie, please. You have to be there on the sidewalk with an open mind and open heart. You have to talk to this person about their divorce and maybe their drug addiction, maybe their history of attempting suicide. You have to talk about all their problems. You have to talk to them about whether or not they see ghosts and they feel they're being haunted by the departed spirit of their grandfather because they always let their grandfather know. Are you kidding me? You have to be open to this person coming home for dinner. So, so like this kind of very cerebral question, which is why I'm making a YouTube video about it, that draws on more than 1,000 years of European political, legal, philosophical history. Okay, but the context for asking this question is getting down on a sidewalk and confronting a stranger about the fact that they are wearing a fur coat, confronting a stranger with the fact that they are wearing leather shoes, confronting a stranger with the fact that they ate beef for lunch, they ate a hamburger for lunch or something like that. And this is being done in the context of a phony revolution, a phony political movement, asking for donations to support a phony cause that is not going to accomplish anything in the next 5 years and that has accomplished nothing in the last 5 years. This is what you're asking for donations for, right? Okay, sorry, bro. Quick illustration so that you can put a face to it. Oh, I'm sorry. What do you think Earthling Ed is going to accomplish in the next 5 years? If you donate another $1 million, if we gather together another $1 million and hand it to Earthling Ed, oh, I'm sorry, you thought that was going to make a difference? Oh, right now there's a civil war going on in Myanmar. Oh, that's a real political cause. There's a real political party fighting for democracy in Myanmar. Oh, $1 million could make a big difference, homie. If you guys want to crowdfund me even going to make a documentary movie in Myanmar, have you heard of this country called Libya? Oh, that's a real political cause. There's a real civil war. Oh, do you want to give me $1 million to make a movie in Libya? Do you want to have $1 million on food, shelter, medicine, bullets, machine guns, artillery? Oh, $1 million could change the history of the world in the right hands, in Myanmar, in Libya, in the context of any political cause. Look, Canada is where I'm currently sitting, okay? For a small political party, for the Green Party of Canada, so it's an ecological party, the Green Party of Canada, you don't think $1 million make a difference? If I had $1 million worth of support and I take over the leadership of the Green Party of Canada, a very small, very weak party, that could make a difference in so many ways, including, the future of the vegan movement, future of, but honestly, even questions of war and peace. And if you're a party like the Green Party, you got to have a position on every issue that way. Israel, Palestine, Iraq, Iran. But yeah, in terms of ecology and the vegan diet, $1 million could make a difference, right? But the basic assumptions built into this phenomenon of standing on a sidewalk and in a completely insincere way confronting a stranger with much less sincerity than a religious fanatic trying to convert you to join their cult. It's sickening. It disgusts me. And the most flattering allegory or comparison I can make is to a game show. That you're saying to this person, come on down and answer these questions. Come on down and do this multiple choice test. Come on down and play this game. And I'm going to film it and I'm going to put it on YouTube so that other vegans can laugh at you. All right. You're not engaging in the cultural anthropology of carnism. You're not sincerely interested in this meat eater's answers to your questions of how do you justify wearing fur, wearing leather, eating beef. You're not studying that. You're not researching that. You have no sympathy for that, right? And you're not actually open to being this person's friend. You're not actually trying to help them. You are really trying to harm them by humiliating them on national television, humiliating them on an international platform like YouTube, so that members of your cult can point and laugh at them. And if this sounds productive to you, if you think this is a way to change the world, tell me something. How's it going to turn out if I start doing this with my fellow Jews? Genetically, I'm Jewish. I'm an atheist. I'm not a member of the Jewish religion, but I'm born into Judaism. If I start hanging around on the sidewalk in one of the suburbs of New York that has a very large Orthodox Jewish community, and I'm doing these same kinds of confrontations about circumcision, So again, I'm not actually trying to be friends with these people. I'm not actually trying to help these people, right? Really implicitly, I'm trying to confront them on the sidewalk in a way where I'm going to be able to make a YouTube video that shows what a hypocrite they are, that shows how out of their depth they are, so on and so forth. And let's just repeat this over and over again for a period of 20 years, which is what we've done in the vegan movement. And let's solicit donations and get support on Patreon and what have you. And you can do this again and again for 20 years. What happens? You gather more support from the people who already supported you. Hopefully, if you're successful, maybe you get no support at all. Maybe you lose 10 years of your life, 20 years of your life, and you never get more than 500 views on YouTube, and you never get more than $50 a month in donations. But okay, best case scenario is you get a kind of snowball effect where, like Earthling Ed, you have more and more support from people who already agree with you. But you will never change the minds of the Orthodox Jews, Hasidic Jews, other passionate members of the Jewish faith who oppose you. On the contrary, I mean, if your fame increases at that point, you will just gain a kind of notoriety where they see this coming. They know who you are, or they know what kind of person you are. So Sky, who has his own YouTube channel, a guy named Sky, his channel is called Vegan Force. He was complaining recently. Oh, he couldn't believe he was banned from a grocery store. That he hadn't even gone in there. He was banned from the grocery store for being a vegan protester. What the hell do you think, Sky? What's the expectation of the owner of this grocery store when he sees a vegan protester pull up? Whether or not that grocery store has been the target of disruption-style activism, such as Direct Action Everywhere is notorious for, but even such as PETA is notorious for, many, many different vegan organizations. This guy knows what to expect because of the very propaganda vegans have put on YouTube. Whether or not he has direct experience with being an employee or being a manager at a grocery store where he has to cope with this. So in the same way, obviously, if you try to broach circumcision this way, sooner or later, like you're successful enough, you're notorious enough, that the very people you're inviting to play this game show with you, the very people you're inviting to engage in this kind of phony cultural anthropology, which again is linked to fundraising for a fake revolution, for a fake cause, soon enough, you're dealing with this kind of inbuilt hostility. You've actually discredited your movement for the outside world while you've built up a kind of credibility with your donor base that over time will become more narrow and more deep. So look, that is the context in which this question is being asked. So, I mean, look, I'm not Machiavelli. I'm not here to give you advice on the way to make the most money out of the vegan movement. I mean, if I were, I would be giving the advice the exact opposite of what's in my book. That, by the way, I sell for $1. So I charge the minimum price I can on Amazon. I'm not trying to make money out of this book. I'm not trying to advise you how to cynically make the most money out of the vegan movement. But like, if the question is just, well, cynically, is it effective to link animal rights discourse to human rights discourse for fundraising purposes? We can have a conversation about that. All right, you want to change the history of Libya a civil war still unfolding. You want to change the history of Syria, a civil war still unfolding to some extent. A little bit late for Syria, but anyway. You want to change the history of Myanmar. You want to change the history of Hong Kong, China. Okay, if you are asking me, all right, cynically, is it going to be effective to engage in human rights discourse? That is really a very different conversation to have. Okay, this is the context in which I'm being asked, basically, my critique and rejection of human rights. What is the point? Then how do we apply that? How do we move forward? Understanding what human rights discourse is, why it exists, and what it means, you have to analyze in two separate categories. One category has to do with the origins of the concept. And then the second category has to do with how the concept is used today. And when I say used, I don't just mean talk. Now, the concept of socialism entered the English language and the French language both in 1835. Did I misspeak? Socialism. Yeah? Okay, sorry. Just checking with my lovely assistant. The meaning of socialism in 1835 is drastically, remarkably different in both its denotation and its connotations than the way we use socialism today. Now, there are many ways which you've got to know both. If you're serious with politics, political philosophy, you should have a sense of how this has developed over time. And it's very interesting to note the original use of socialism, the 1830s, was not a dry academic economic concept. Instead, it was actually linked to what were really the sexy cult groups of the time. The new utopianism of Robert Owen and derivative start your own commune kind of free love hippie groups, people that were going out into the wilderness and getting a tract of land and starting their own farm and theorizing about why human beings didn't need money, that society would be a better place if you didn't have prices and didn't have money, and if we had more free love, more free sex, more free food. And as you may know, most of those utopian experiments ended in disaster. However, they were not a disaster of the kind that Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong would bring about. So they were moderate disasters, you might say. And then they learned from that experience and they adapted and moved on. And that was the context in which the idea of socialism was first deployed. Okay, that is meaningful. That is important. But then we have to turn to the question of how much has the meaning of socialism changed within just the last 10 years or the last 20 years in the United States of America. And to give an example, I think probably socialism has a very different meaning right now in Spanish. You know, like Venezuela is kind of a big deal in the Spanish-speaking world. What has happened within the last 20 years in Venezuela, Chile and South America generally too, but especially Venezuela, that will have changed the way people use the word socialism in its denotation and connotations in Spanish. And meanwhile, in the same period of 20 years, we had the rise and fall of Bernie Sanders in the United States of America. Bernie Sanders completely changed the way people use the word socialism, completely changed the real meaning of socialism. And again, Bernie Sanders had both a rise and a fall. Like he came to a kind of pinnacle of his influence in politics and his influence in the language. And then he declined. And we can really ask the question, what does socialism mean now? What does it mean today? All right. Human rights, the rights of man. Okay. This emerged in its origins strictly and cynically to justify the murder of the king. Three different historical contexts. Number one, the English Civil War. Number two, the American Revolution. Number three, the French Revolution. So, in the case of the American Revolution, I admit they did not literally murder the king. However, I would point out to you the extent to which this was treason and rebellion against the king. If you had been an American colonist alive at that time, you had just recently been fighting with the British king against the Spanish and against the French, and you were now entering into an alliance with the French and Spanish, with the very same troops, the very same armies and navies that had been your enemies a few minutes before, to fight against the King of England, to fight against British troops. So it's true, the American Revolution did not kill or assassinate the King of England, but to really put yourself in a situation, realize what a morally disturbing kind of blood feud that would be within the British Empire. You have to take a minute and use sympathy as an analytical tool. Try to sympathize with people. Families were torn apart. There'd be two different brothers in the same family, and one would say, no, I'm going to remain loyal to the King of England. I am not going to join an army of bandits working with the Spanish and the French to fight against the King of England and the King's troops. And there would be another brother in the same family who'd instead support the revolution. But in the case of the English Civil War and the French Revolution, they did literally decapitate. They did literally kill and execute the king. And on what basis? Okay, the rights of man. So this was a cynical, misleading propaganda term from its inception, from the first day to the last day, to how it is used now. Psychologically, why do people prefer, cling to, and just leap to human rights discourse? They perceive weakness as strength. If you say that women in Afghanistan have the right to an education, they just have it, the same way that a diabetic just has diabetes. What you are really saying is that you don't have to explain why, you don't have to explain how, you don't have to justify it. This is an innate condition of the human body, that rights and freedoms are just found within people. And obviously, this is just flagrantly untrue. In Afghanistan today, women do not have the right to an education. What rights do women have, if any? And again, my question is, why are we articulating our political desires or our political goals in terms of rights that people have, and then by extension, rights that animals have, so on and so forth? So it seems strong to people, but I'm suggesting to you that there's really a deeper weakness, or there's a kind of brittleness in that surface level strength. Now, this leads to different kinds of misconceptions. I was talking recently with another vegan YouTuber who I can say is a political philosopher in his own right. I'm going to leave him anonymous because what one would say is somewhat nasty and vicious and cruel. I like the guy, but nevertheless, he was insisting to me, and I'm sure sooner or later he'll make a YouTube video saying this, or maybe it's already been covered in some podcast or something, some interview he's done. He was insisting to me that law has nothing to do with veganism, that law is completely extraneous, completely unrelated, and in some profound sense, I'm going to tell you, it's even antithetical to veganism. He says that veganism is only and exclusively an issue of personal, private, moral perception. So either you perceive the animal's body as something to be exploited, or you do not. Either you perceive meat as food, or you do not. Either you perceive the feathers of a chicken as something that can be used in stuffing a pillow, or you do not. So he says any law that would coerce people into doing or not doing the right thing. So, for example, a law that makes pillows stuffed with chicken feathers illegal. So if that law exists, as soon as that law exists, then what we were talking about is no longer veganism. No. So obviously, from my perspective, well, the outcome is vegan, right? The outcome is getting rid of. What do you mean? This is so. From my perspective, this is crazy in various ways. So for him, a meaningful parallel is racism and anti-racism. So I'm completely cynical, I'm completely nihilistic. Of course, I want laws that coerce the outcomes of anti-racism. For example, I want a law that ensures that a Black person trying to get a loan from the bank, whether it's a loan to buy a house or a loan to start a business, that actually exactly the same criteria will be applied to a Black person as to a white person, that you cannot refuse, the bank cannot refuse this kind of economic opportunity to someone because they're Black. as opposed to white. So that's my agenda. But his perspective would be no, no, no. In terms of racism and anti-racism, this has to deal with perception. Whether or not you really perceive Black people as unequal, whether or not you feel this kind of prejudice or inequality, and that therefore, again, likewise, law and legislation is relevant. Okay, here's the problem with human rights discourse and animal rights discourse. It allows people like him, it allows all of you in the audience to think the statement, this animal has rights, this person has rights, means anything other than a threat of punishment if you do what is contrary to those rights. And that's all it is. So all kinds of leftists and anarchists, whether you're a communist, an anarcho-capitalist, or what have you, all these lovers of freedom, the ideology of freedom, they go around pretending that rights are this wonderful thing. And all that it is a misleading propaganda claim, right? Kind of forced down over the surface of the threat of punishment, the threat of prison. And it allows us as believers to believe that we are supporting the most refined and libertarian of doctrines, when all it is that we believe in is punishing anyone who disagrees with us and our agenda with chains. So I was born, you might have guessed, part of my penis was cut off in an ancient ritual called circumcision. What rights did I have? If you write a law that says it is a human right not to have part of your penis cut off without your adult consent, like unless you are 18 years old and you give consent to this operation, then it's illegal. So what is the meaning? If you articulate this as a claim about human rights, what does it mean? It means your parents will go to prison if they break. It means the rabbi, the priest, the surgeon will go to prison. A medical doctor will lose his license and pay a fine, and that's all it is. It's a propaganda claim to glorify and kind of distract you from the reality of course of legislation. And in the absence of that enforcement, the right means nothing at all. I had another example in mind. In Afghanistan, imagine what kind of coercive enforcement you need to have. For example, to eliminate arranged marriage. To say, oh no, the father or the brother, they can't arrange for the who the woman is going to marry. It must be the woman's own choice. How are you going to enforce that? How are you going to ensure that? Oh no, the father and the brother, they can't decide that the girl should drop out of school and just be a housewife. The woman has the right to education. She has the right to pursue a career. Oh yeah, so that sounds lovely. That sounds very positive. Are you willing to start putting Muslim leaders in prison? With the context of circumcision, are you willing to start putting rabbis in prison? Are you willing to start kicking down the door of a synagogue in New York City? So in Afghanistan, are you willing to start kicking down the door of the mosque and putting religious leaders in prison? Are you willing to put the father and the brother in prison because they infringed on the the woman's rights? I'm in a situation right now in relation to Spain, in relation to Europe. Before we visited Greece, obviously we visited France. Okay, I do not have the right to employment in Europe. Okay, the rights of man. Okay, what does this mean in practice? It means if I get a job and start earning money, I will be put in prison. That is absolutely all that it means. Okay, so look, coming back to my major premise here. There may be sort of three different headings I have to deal with. The most fundamental question is, who do you want to be? Do you want to be right or wrong? Do you want to be coherent or incoherent? Do you want to be sane or insane? So my colleague who remained unnamed, he may go on to be a more successful political philosopher than I am. He may go on to be a more successful leader in the vegan movement. He may go on to lead a revolution to liberate the people of Cuba from communism, something I'd very much like to do myself. He may go on to lead a rebel army in Myanmar. and reestablish democracy in Myanmar. Really, like it's possible this guy with his philosophy is going to be more successful than me. I say this with all due humility. However, I am able to say to him sincerely, and I'm able to say to you sincerely, this philosophy is incorrect. It's bad, it's wrong, it's incoherent. And I can really say, if you take this seriously and live by it, it even leads you toward a kind of insanity. And that's the problem with having deeply incoherent, self-contradictory beliefs. So in this same sense, the most profound, important question about human rights discourse is the question of whether we are to be sane and insane. Pardon me. Whether we are to be sane or insane. And what kind of person you want to be, who you want to become in, say, the next 5 years. So look, feminism in Afghanistan. You had 19 years of American occupation in Afghanistan. If you wanted to make a difference, if you wanted to do something to help women in Afghanistan, you had every opportunity. What was the point during those 19 years of military occupation in making a sort of chalkboard, logic-based reasoning about rights, as opposed to actually getting involved, actually making a difference and facing up to in the real world what the price is going to be, what the sacrifice is, what's going to entail to, create a better future for the women of Afghanistan through education, through feminism being put into practice, so on and so forth. And inevitably that's humbling. And now we're in an even more bizarre situation. Well, do you want to sit back and cross your arms and write up a discourse on the chalkboard about women's rights and human rights and feminism and judge how American policy in Afghanistan was wrong, and judge how the Taliban is wrong? Like, what is the point ultimately of just kind of preening in your self-righteousness when you're just comparing yourself to the Taliban? You compare yourself to the Taliban on the one hand and the CIA on the other, I guess. Well, congratulations, you feel morally superior to these people. You think you're right and they're wrong, as opposed to having a philosophy of action, a philosophy that is really, designed to change the world, and a philosophy that is going to plunge you into the political struggles that are unfolding in the world around you as they are happening in a way that leads you to really learn from them. Okay, so look, I know this seems like a huge leap, but okay, if you are standing on the sidewalk kind of preening about your moral superiority over others, so what is the point? What is the point? Are you actually trying to help people? Do you actually love these people? Is this someone you're going to invite back to your home? Think of how different it is inviting a complete stranger to play this game show and humiliate themselves in your YouTube channel, and the way you would treat your own father or your own grandfather, your own mother or your own grandmother. It's like, look, I really care about you. I really respect you, grandma. Yeah, there are health benefits. I want you to not have a heart attack. I want you to not have high cholesterol and high blood. Yeah, okay, that's one side. But the other side is, I want you to be a morally good person. I want you to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Like, I care about you in that sense. I have enough intellectual respect for you, enough ethical respect for you. I don't want you to be some scumbag. I don't want you to be some terrible person in the next 10 years of your life. I really care about you. And then what you're going to find out right away is what your grandmother's reasons are for not being vegan, for rejecting veganism, for scrutinizing, for either, not believing the vegan message. Like there may be skepticism in that sense. It's genuine disbelief. Or more likely, there's hostility. What her reasons are for scoffing at you, for laughing at you, for dismissing you. Now, again, is this going to be anthropology or what? People, what a world of difference between that and how you treat these people on the sidewalk. Whether you do, disruption style activism, whether you do confrontational activism, or whether you're doing this strange psychological striptease, the game show of engaging with strangers that way. The type of insanity that human rights discourse conditions us for and leads us into runs as follows. And you've all heard this. Okay, I'm right and you're wrong. These people have human rights, and if you can't recognize that, you're a Nazi. Well, I'm right and you're wrong. People just implicitly and inherently have these rights. And no matter how much empirical evidence exists to the contrary, I'm going to keep on dreaming And if you won't dream along with me, then you're a Nazi. You're evil, and that's it. And then this pattern is repeated with animal rights discourse. Well, I believe, because I've made it up in my head or I read it in a book, whatever your source of information, I believe animals have rights. Okay, what do rights consist of? A declaration from the United Nations, a statement in a religious tome, some authoritative piece of text somewhere tells you that animals have rights. Okay, it's not like diabetes. You get a blood test, you can determine I have diabetes or I don't have diabetes. That's something you physically have or you don't have. No. So you want to just adopt this position that these things are unassailable, self-evident, right? This is always the language being used. These truths we hold to be self-evident. That, whether it is animals or people, that this is just something they have. This is just something they are. And that you do not need to justify or explain your own philosophy. You don't even have to prove to anyone that it's going to work. And guess what? Look at women in Afghanistan. It doesn't work. I mean, look at all the disasters of humanitarian intervention all around the world since the end of World War II. Like, it is not a minor footnote that human rights discourse, the human rights approach, even to people, has failed again and again and again for more than 50 years. It is not a minor footnote that the animal rights approach to veganism has failed again and again and again for, again, whether we're going to say 50 years or otherwise. We have to be sensitive to the most fundamental and rudimentary insanity of saying, this is a fiction. I want this fiction to be real. And my judgment of whether you are a good person or a bad person, right, derives from precisely the extent to which you're willing to believe in this fiction along with me. Does this remind you of anything? The claim that Jesus Christ died to redeem you, and this can only have its magical effects on your life and your afterlife. It is a fiction, right? And for so many centuries, people have tried so hard, right? And they've organized whole societies. They've organized small communes. They've organized cities. They've organized civilizations, right, around this fiction and the moral demand that you must believe. You must believe to be a good person. And, most troublingly, of course, you must believe in order to even have a voice, in order to be heard, in order to be allowed to speak on a public issue. Otherwise, you're not to be taken seriously. Indeed, to come back to rights discourse, otherwise, you have no rights at all if you won't share in this, if you won't believe along with me. Now, hey guys, have you heard about this? The right not to be tortured, the right not to endure a cruel and unusual punishment, that you just have to. Have you seen how that worked out? Have you seen that worked out within my lifetime, within living memory? What is the point of standing there in front of a chalkboard? You can write these rights. You can write these on a chalkboard just as well as you can write the miracles of Jesus. You can write any religious fiction on a chalkboard and then stand there and preach to the audience, believe, believe, believe. And the ultimate purpose of believing is not that it will actually help women in Afghanistan. It's not that it's going to help me get a job in Spain or in Europe, but my right to work, my right to employment. And it's not that it's going to liberate even one cow from one factory farm or one abattoir. The purpose ultimately is for you to feel like you are a good person, is for you to be able to say, well, I don't believe in torture. Okay. And what you're actually doing step by step is leading yourself into living in a world of magical fictions that make you feel morally superior instead of dealing with the real world, with the tragedy of what has happened in Myanmar, with the tragedy of what has happened in Afghanistan, with the tragedy of what happens in an abattoir on a daily basis to cows that live their whole lives on a concrete floor under a steel sky until one day, a machine slits their throat. When you talk to these people on the sidewalk, you're expecting them to be honest. And the question you're asking me is precisely of the ways in which you should be dishonest, cynical, misleading, the ways in which you should cultivate a kind of marketing message that's phony and manipulative. And what I want to ask is why? Why is that the discussion we're having at all in 2024? I do not feel that you can be a good person and eat meat. We could add a footnote here for what if your airplane crashed on a deserted island. We could add a few footnotes, exceptional circumstances in which a vegan would approve of eating meat. What if you have to take a prescription medication to change your life and the vitamin pill or whatever it is contains trace amounts of, we can add some. Okay. Imagine how different this whole mode of sidewalk interview activism would be if you were really as honest with these meat eaters as they were being with you. If right from the beginning you're like, yeah, I regard you as morally worse than the average Nazi. Like what you do unthinkingly in wearing those leather shoes right now and in walking to McDonald's and having a hamburger, I actually regard you as morally worse than the average man who signed up to fight for the German army against Stalin. Okay. In case you don't know, again, my own Jewish ancestors were put into concentration camps. I am certainly very strongly biased against Adolf Hitler, but there were a whole lot of people in Germany who knew what the threat from Stalin was, who knew what the threat was of Soviet communism, and who knew what would happen to them and everyone they loved if they let Russia conquer Germany. And they knew what was coming, and there were a whole lot of men who swallowed their pride and signed up to fight in the German army, knowing how crazy and immoral Hitler as an individual was, and with some level of derision for Nazi philosophy, National Socialist propaganda and bullshit. They're like, well, at the end of the day, either Joseph Stalin is going to come here and conquer Germany or not. So they did have their backs against the wall at that point. As ludicrous as it is to say, there was a sense in which at that stage, it's become a defensive war. And you didn't choose to buy leather shoes for any of those reasons. So to me, you're worse, you're deplorable, you're disgusting. Okay? No. How would these conversations go about human rights if I were really honest with these members of the Orthodox Jewish faith who are committing this heinous crime against their own children again and again and again? I'm expecting them to be honest with me when I ask them to give their reasons. What if I were really honest with them? Okay. And now finally, what if we were not engaged in a cynical fundraising exercise for the future of democracy in Myanmar or the future of democracy in Libya? What if we were really honest with people about what this dire struggle is and our own sense of outrage and heartbreak that we live in a society where nobody cares? We're like, I am the only one who cares about the future of democracy in Myanmar. Nobody in the CIA cares. If you think it's tough being in a country where the CIA cares a little bit too much, it gets scary when you're in one of the places where the CIA just doesn't care at all. And you hope and pray every day the CIA will take an interest in the future democracy in your country. And, yes, from a Machiavellian perspective, I could coach you through how to cynically deploy human rights discourse to make money in the 21st century. Okay. But both here on this YouTube channel, and in my $1 book, that's not what I'm trying to do. And in the same sense in which I don't really think it is possible for you to be a morally good person without being vegan, I don't really think it is possible for you to pursue political change of any other kind. It is possible for you to pursue the type of political change people are alluding to with human rights, the better world they are dreaming of when they think of human rights. I don't think it is possible for you to pursue that on the basis of deeply incoherent and self-contradictory views. On the basis of a political philosophy that, if taken seriously and preached sincerely, would, in a single sentence fragment, drive you to the brink of insanity.